Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is NurFatihah Irdina binti Adlan with the matric number 2016970, and this is for my class subject Islamic Literature 4020 section 2. Before we begin, the topic that I have chosen to present about is from Dr. Abdul Hamid Ahmad Abu Sulaiman, which is Crisis in the Muslim Mind. So before we begin to discuss about Crisis in the Muslim Mind, written by Dr. Abdul Hamid Ahmad Abu Sulaiman, which is the second rector of IIM, we must first discuss about what is his educational background. So he started off receiving his degree, 2 degrees, at University of Cairo in 1959 and also 1963 respectively. First, he received his degree in commerce, and then secondly, he received his degree in political science. And then he continued with his PhD at University of Pennsylvania in 1973. He also had a few administrative background. For example, he was the chairman of the King Saud University's Political Science Department. And then he went on to become the founding member of the International Institute of Islamic Thought and the Association of Muslim Social Scientists. And then in Malaysia, he finally became the rector of the International Islamic University Malaysia from 1988 until 1998. And that brought much impact to not just university, but also the Islamic paradigm in Malaysia. He also had affairs with political leaders in Malaysia, which influenced their political expansion that we see towards the end of our. Dr. Abdul Hamid Ahmad Abu Sulaiman's contribution in his most famous works are first, obviously, Crisis in the Muslim Mind, which was published in 1986, and then Theory of International Relations, New Directions for Islamic Methodology and Thought, which was published in 1993, and then Islamization, Reforming Contemporary Knowledge, published in 1994, and lastly, The Quranic Worldview, A Springboard for Cultural Reform, which was published in 2011. Before I begin into the depth of this topic, why did I choose to present about crisis in the Muslim mind? I understand from the perspective of from a student is that in order to have a sound mind, you must first be physically and psychologically healthy, as what also Dr. Abdul Hamid Ahmad Abu Sulaiman has mentioned. But he did not, in this book he states that to achieve a state of mind that is free from crisis, it depends on not just our innermost work that we must do by ourselves, but also through a sound economy, a just system, to live in a society that is healthy, that is healthy amongst each other, which is why I decided to choose this book, Crisis in Muslim Mind, because I feel like everyone is facing some problems that we could relate to one another, and Dr. Abdul Hamid Ahmad Abu Sulaiman was also a student, was also a rector at IIM. So in a way, he must know what students of IIM are facing. I hope that this book will bring guidance for not just to me, but to all of you who decide to read on this book in the future. The introduction: Crisis in the Muslim Mind. Dr. Abdul Hamid Ahmad Abu Sulaiman has elaborated that the decline of Ummah has similar patterns that happened along the threads of history back then and the reality that we face today. The problems that we have today has also occurred back then, and that the reasons of decline include, first, that we see is the spread of corruption, and then the change from an offensive to a defensive posture, and then we will examine from the losses that sustained at Baghdad, Jerusalem, Cordoba, and other places. These places have faced problems that are similar to what happened around the world today, especially in Malaysia. Back then, we had Sabaiyah, Ismailiyah, and Nusairiyah. Today, we face problems such as Ahmadiyya, Qadaniyah, and nationalists. what I like to focus on is nationalists that we see is quite prominent here in Malaysia, especially after the recent general election that happened. We see the rise of nationalists from all states, not just in Kuala Lumpur, but in Selangor, in Negeri Sembilan, in Kedah, in Pahang, in Pulau Pinang, Perak, and other states. The nationalists exist because of the sacrifice that they think they need to make for the country, but they forgot that in order to have a sound political system in a country, they must also derive from they also must have Islamic roots to support the nation. But because due to these problems that we face today, Ahmadiyya, Qadniyah, and nationalists, Islam in everyone's mind is considered is something that not many people take seriously today, because Islam is no longer portrayed as the empire that once reigned, that once brought our country forward. But instead, it's just somehow Islam is just a religion in Malaysia that we pray to, and that we conduct our prayers to, but we fail to acknowledge Islam as a deen, as a way of life. Now we know the problems that arise in that Muslim Ummah see. Now we know that the problems that come from Ahmadiyya, Qadniyah, and nationalists. What I like most about this book is also that Abdul Hamid Ahmad Abu Sulaiman also explains the solutions, and he also explains the solutions and the roots that we see that leads to this problem. These solutions explained by Dr. Abdul Hamid Ahmad Abu Sulaiman it's not just for readers to read as a leisure read, but it is also for Ummah's thinkers, leadership, scholars, and youth, so that they will arise to the challenge and accept their responsibility as a Muslim openly and truthfully as they read this book. So in essence, do we have a solution for the crisis that we are facing? The crisis mostly exists from Western civilization that has seeped its way into our life, into our thought, and into our institutions. How we talk is because of the Western civilization. The music nowadays that we listen to are also because as a product of Western civilization. Even the syllabus that we see in our education, that in our system of education today, is also as a result of Western civilization. Due to this mixture of trying to implement Western civilization in a non-Western country, it has brought several crises in the Ummah, and because of those crises, Muslim Ummah are facing problems such as backward and aimlessness of existence. There's a sudden feeling of emptiness at the end, which leads to the rise of Western civilization, but the decline of Islamic civilization, because we keep implementing the Western in Islam, which has probably erased most of what Islam has taught. So, do we have a solution for this? Based in the book, Dr. Abdul Hamid Ahmad Abu Sulaiman did explain that back then, in history, they had starting points to move forward Islam. They have solutions, but these solutions has brought about the downwards and backwards of Islam more than it should, more than the rise of Islam. Okay, before that, I'm going to tell you the story. The Arab tribes. Let's get a reality check. Let's check here whether what is happening, what Dr. Abdul Hamid Ahmad Abu Sulaiman quoted in his book is happening today. In the book, he says that Some of those who claim to be reformers are in fact the Ummah's enemy, for they promote these foreign ideologies by all the means at their disposal. They often claim that these ideologies are a sign of healthy society. To an extent, I think this is true, because we see our political scene in Malaysia today that most political leaders, they create manifestos, they create promises, and those promises are not kept. They fail to respond to the responsibility that they have created. They fail to commit to the promises. And some also, for example, in the picture shown below, that is Najib. He was caught part of the IMDb scandal, and it also shows that the manifestos that he has presented in the general election has backfired, because he tried to take money he stole the money that was given for Malaysians. He used it for his own benefit. Although those manifestos that he presented has influenced some people, because he represents a party that has their own ideology and has their own society, that represents their own society, and most of them believe this ideology because they think it's right for them to vote for the party, especially when it comes to elections. But then after the elections had dissolved, they found out that Najib failed to keep his promises and instead used the money for other wrongdoings. This also shows that to a certain extent, what Dr. Abdul Hamid Ahmad Abu Sulaiman has said is true, that some of them claim to be reformers, but in fact are Ummah's worst enemy, because in Islam we don't teach each other to steal. We don't teach each other to steal, but instead we must use that money for the expansion of the Ummah, to use that money to help the poor, to bring Islam to its golden age before it gets corrupted. But these corruptions is the result of trying to advance our country also. Now the question brings back to whether these three solutions that I just said, the imitative foreign solution, the imitative historical solution, and the Islamic Aksala solution, are these solutions applicable to Muslims today? For example, we see that the imitative historical solution, at present, this solution disregards temporal, local, and ummatic considerations. It ignores the realities of history and material development. If it does help our ummah today, why do our ummah still faces some crisis? Why do we have problems that arise from these solutions? And a prominent Muslim reformer, he accidentally misinterpreted this solution. He misinterpreted the social and political systems at the time of Khulafa. He believed that reformation could only come from just dictatorship, which is not aligned with the Islamic teachings, because there is no such thing as dictatorship and just together. The next solution is the imitative foreign solution. So during the Turkish Uthmaniyya Empire, the Uthmaniyya adopted a policy of imitating Europe to renew their declining power. As a result, there was a cycle of emptiness and loss of attention due to import foreign technical knowledge and experience. Because they tried to implement the Western civilization into their own culture, they accidentally slaughtered their own traditional military corps as a result of establishing its first modern engineering college and military academy for training officers along the western lines, which means that most of the militaries at the time, they don't have the pride of sacrificing for Islam, but they only went to college for the sake of for the sake of getting a job. There are a lot of relations that we can see during the Turkish Uthmaniyah Empire with the current political situation that we see now. For example, during the Turkish Uthmaniyah Empire, they adopted liberal political and social reforms, which is known as the Midat Pasha's Constitution. Now we see that they are trying to. Now we see that in Malaysia, especially, they have been a rise of liberal political and social reforms, especially in the new party that we see, Pakatan Harapan. Most of the leaders are they have liberal mindset. This liberal mindset have brought upon the downfall of Islam. And during the Turkish Uthmaniyah Empire, we also see that General Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, he tried to abolish the role of Islam and Islamic culture in society. Recently, there has been a political situation in Malaysia where they tried to abolish Islamic rites such as the tabung haji that Muslims usually put their money in for Umrah. But due to racial issues that we have between non-Muslims and Muslims in Malaysia, they tried to abolish this tabung haji, which has made many Muslims in this country very angry. And also, during the Turkish Uthmaniyah Empire, they tried to adopt European dress, and it is in such a way to do that they must discard the hijab. And this can be seen in the current political situation that we see in France today, that they try to ban hijab in France because they think that hijab is not a choice, but hijab represents freedom. Hijab represents the symbol of freedom, that women, due to women's right, we should not wear hijab. But they do not know that part of being a Muslim is obligatory for a Muslim to wear hijab. But in France, they tried to ban hijab. So what are the disadvantage or effect of imitative foreign solution? First, it is obviously it is just blind imitation. They tried to follow the footsteps of the Western country, the European country, but instead the Turkish Uthmaniyah Empire, they failed miserably, which has then led to intellectual stagnation. And then religious scholars with no political or social role. Back then they had to divide intellectual role and political role separately, but they also had to work together. But because they adopted this European policy, so religious scholars, they lost their voice in their political or social role, which means that the law in the Turkish Uthmaniyah, it has nothing to do with religion, but it is just a man-made law with no religious basis. And this also leads to repression, tyranny, and subjugation. Because of the hijab issue in the Turkish Uthmaniyah, most women are repressed from giving the right model of Islam, from showcasing the true meaning of women in Islam. Instead, they are subjected to Western ideologies, which most of Muslims disagree with. We are reaching towards the conclusion of this small little part of this book. In essence, we can see that the problems of Ummah are clearly connected to how we think, our confused thinking, our obscure social vision, improper and inadequate education, and decline of these institutions in general, which leads to this implementation of a rather not a solid solution given to everyone, but it worsens the Ummah instead. So what we all can derive from this book is that we must learn beyond what is taught by other people to us. We must learn beyond that the book, We must learn beyond than the teachings in class, so that we can make the right solutions, we can make the right decisions that can impact us in a good way. So if others fail, we continue the legacy in the right way, of course, inshallah. That's all from me. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.